We're here to celebrate not only a famous person, but a person that has built part of society for all of us that we either have forgotten or didn't know about, or it's time we paid attention to. Margaret Birch. I'm not going to do the thing, but I think we could all recite the speech. In 1970, we heard it 3 times this morning. Margaret decided to, well, there we go. It's all printed in the brochure anyway. And we're going to move along, and we have some people here we'd like you to meet briefly, and some short speeches we're going to hear. And then we'll be ready to go for a photo at the foot of the great stairs. And you're all invited to take part in that photo. Anybody we can pick up along the way that can fill in the spaces, we'll also be glad to accommodate as well. So without a lot of ado, I'm going to ask my friend Andy Mitchell to bring greetings from the Federal Association of Former Parliamentarians. Andy?
Good afternoon, and thank you very much for the invitation to be here. The Federal Association, to Margaret, wants to bring greetings and congratulations. I cannot think of a more deserving recipient of a Distinguished Service Award. I think in listening to the tributes in the House today and seeing the colleagues and former colleagues and family that are here, that you've earned both the respect and, dare I say, the love of the people that you have touched. You've had a remarkable career. We heard many things about it earlier today. But I think one of the things that is probably most clear to everybody in this room is that there are people's lives who are better for the service that you have provided to this province and to this country. And on behalf of all of them, in my small way, is to say thank you for all that you've done. And it's a great honor to be here and to be part of this celebration. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andy. I've got a couple of other people I'd like to mention, and they are as follows. Peggy Slater and Sattler. As bad as me. No, not quite. I strive for greatness, Steve, but I don't get it. I'm sorry, Peggy. Peggy gave that marvelous talk this morning on behalf of the NDP. You did a great job. Thank you. The first one of the former members who is going to honor us with some remarks at this point is Gillian Sandeman. Gillian was the MPP from Peterborough from the very great long time. I can say that because I was elected for exactly the same amount of time, from 1975 to 77, but it was the best parliament they ever saw, wasn't it? Gillian.
Oh, I'm bringing my wine up, and I'm seeing all these empty glasses. I might be moved to make a toast at the end of my remarks. So they can all fill their glasses, yes. Yeah, it's been, Margaret, 40 years. Oh, sorry. Is that better? Is that on? Yes, I'd forgotten about, spit right into it. Margaret, it's been 40 years since you and I were in a room together. And you probably don't remember me, but I remember you so well. I was young and in awe of you in 1975. Doug's absolutely right. You will remember Eli Martell. Eli looked around the NDP caucus one day at a caucus meeting, and he looked at the folks like Doug and I, and he said, well, you overnight guests, you won't understand this. And he was absolutely right. We were overnight guests, but it was an important time in our lives, in my life, and it's a huge honor to be here today when you are receiving this Distinguished Service Award. People have talked about your career before and after your years in the legislature, but today this gathering is to focus on those legislative years. And of course, when people remember, there's still a few of them in Peterborough, that I was in the legislature many long years ago, they say to me, what was it like? And one of the first things I often say is, well, you know, there were only 7 women and there were 120 men or something, a lot more of them than of us. But of course, when you were elected, there were 2 of you. In 71, I think I'm right. And then in 72, 3. Margaret Scrivener, Margaret Birch, and Margaret Campbell. So when I was running in 75 as a rare sort of woman candidate, I thought, my parents chose the wrong name. I'll never make it. And I remembered, I had moved to Canada from Scotland some years before, and I remembered the 3 Marys, Mary of Guise, Mary, Queen of Scots. And do you remember what John Knox called those 3 Marys? The monstrous regiment of women. And as I was canvassing, I sometimes felt that some of the constituents felt that women like Margaret, who were already in the legislature, and women like me, who were trying to join you, were in some ways, if not a monstrous regiment of women, odd creatures who should be staying home and making cookies. I remember, I still remember one kindly gentleman on his front porch who said to me, he had my brochure in his hand, and you remember, maybe you all, the new folk, the young folks still do it. You put a picture of you, your happy family, your husband, your children, and they do it. The dog, we had cats, and hamsters, and fish, and gerbils, anyway. So this gentleman had my brochure, and he said, you have children? Yes, I said proudly, they're wonderful. And he said, so why are you running then? And that was kind of part of the mindset. So it was quite something to be part of that early cohort of women in the legislature. But Margaret, I was rereading what Steve Pakin reported, that you said to him, I think, that you never felt, and I'm paraphrasing, that you were the butt of sexist behavior or remarks in your caucus or in the legislature. And I must say, I always felt the same, that we might have been odd, but we were welcome, in spite of the fact that there were so few of us, and respected, I believe. And I thought, you know, goodness, I was only there for a short time, but I was the opposition critic for Community and Social Services, and you were the Social Development Secretary, so maybe we had long and impassionate debates in those late night sessions. So I went to Hansard to try to find them. Well, part of the problem for narcissist people like me is that the electronic Hansard only goes back to 1977. And I discovered that in 1977, we sat for 1 month before Mr. Davis called the election. So not a lot of opportunity for great debates between you and I about social development affairs. I did find though, some things in Hansard. Here we go. Gives you a flavor of, if I can find it, here we go. Oral questions. Ms. Sandeman, I have a question of the Provincial Secretary for Social Development. Could the Minister please explain why the recommendations made to her in February by the Advisory Council on the Physically Handicapped about increases in family benefits to the disabled were ignored in the announcement of increases in the family benefits made last week. The Honourable Mrs. Birch. No, Mr. Speaker, I cannot. So then some of our male colleagues jumped in at that point, and an on member, after the male colleagues had finished jumping in, said that, Mr. Speaker, an on member, the original questioner should be allowed one supplementary interjections. But the Speaker said, we will allow a final supplementary from the original questioner. So I got this real zinger in. I just wished to ask the Minister whether she had discussed these excellent recommendations with the Minister of Community and Social Services. On Mrs. Birch, those recommendations have been circulated to all of the ministries involved, and when I have the responses, we will be considering it in total. And you know, I think that Bill Davis did a really great thing when he understood that there are a group of ministries that have to talk to each other. And I can only begin to imagine the magnitude of your job trying to hold all those balls in the air and talk about disability to social services, to health, to education. I didn't understand it at the time, but I think I understand it a bit better now because it's been 40 years and I'm a whole lot older. And, oh, well, you know, you want the other piece of you and my discussions. I asked you about the Ontario Building Code. That was exciting. But you know, it's always the role of the opposition to be critical. So I talked to you about the exclusions from the Ontario Building Code, which didn't at that point cover the disabled, getting into churches, medical centers, convalescent homes, home for the aged, and so on and so on. And you were working on that. And I realized that, you know, now I realize, when you said you were working on it, that there was a hell of a lot of stuff going on in the back rooms. And you know, I only really realized that when I came back to Queen's Park in 1990, not as an elected member, but to work in the Premier's office with the ministers. And it was a huge eye-opener. I really think that the work that this association, the Retired Parliamentarians, is doing to try and explain to students and so on the work of the Ontario government is so important, because if somebody like me, who was there, admittedly for less than 2 years, didn't really get it, then we have an obligation to help the rest of the province understand the important work that people like Margaret were and are doing. And you know, it occurred to me when I was thinking about what I wanted to say today, and I was reading more and more about what you did before you came to the legislature and what you did afterwards, that if you and I had both lived in the same town, if I had lived in Scarborough, or you, probably you wouldn't want to, but had lived in Peterborough, we would have been on the same committees, because we are both share that need to serve, and people ask us to be on boards and committees. And I know that you were on the Social Planning Council. I was president of the Peterborough Social Planning Council. I've worked in health, mental health, youth services, and I just wish I had known you better, rather than as the critic, just asking you these snide little questions at question period time. And just in conclusion, I was so excited to be asked to do this. I was having lunch with a friend who's somewhat younger and is still very active in social services in Peterborough, And I told her that I was coming here today as part of, and being asked to make a few remarks to honor you. And she said that your name had come up in conversation just a few days ago. She had been talking to a former hospital social worker about a report that she, my friend, did in 1978 for the city of Peterborough. The report was called The Dependent Minority, a study of the needs of the handicapped in the city of Peterborough. And she said that you were mentioned in the context of the changing role of government around social development in those years. And she concluded, I asked her to send me an email about it, and her email concludes, I guess the main message about all this is that Margaret Birch was seen to be a force to be reckoned with at a time when communities were wanting social change. So I ask you to join me in a toast to Margaret Birch, a force to be reckoned with.
Okay, at this point, I'd like to call upon Phil Gillis to bring greetings. Thank you, Phil.
Thank you, Doug. Gillian just said you'll remember Eli Martell, and my life just flashed before my eyes. But Doug and esteemed colleagues and former colleagues, Mrs. Birch, it's just a pleasure to be here today and to add a few words. I had the honor of serving as Margaret's parliamentary assistant, 1981 and 82, but we actually encountered one another before then. And this goes back to one thing that we've spoken about in the speeches in the House today, and I think it'll be a recurring theme, the pioneering nature of being a female politician in the 70s, of being a cabinet minister, one of the very first in the country. And so Mrs. Birch and I both supported Flora MacDonald in her bid for the federal PC leadership in 1976. And if we ever needed to be schooled in the challenges that faced female politicians in those days, there was a lesson. It's hard to believe in the context of 2016 that a fellow party member would stand in front of you 40 years ago and say, you know, I think Flora is the best candidate, but I won't be voting for her because I just don't think we're ready for a woman leader. And we ran into that all the time. And of course, we've all heard the stories, or a few of us were there, I guess, to see what happened on the floor of that convention, that there were many more people who would evince their support for that particular candidate, but didn't actually vote that way. And it's in that context that I recognize the huge contributions that Margaret made, and indeed our late friend Margaret Scrivener and others who followed, very, very high-powered, dedicated female members in the House into the 80s. I always felt, frankly, to get elected and serve as a woman in those days, you had to be that much better. And I believe that to be the case, certainly, in the case of our friend Margaret Birch. So my first assignment after I was elected in 1981 at the age of 26, which doesn't seem that young in light of recent events, but certainly the age of 26, you think you know everything, and it takes a Margaret Birch to show you that you didn't know everything. And it was a tremendous learning experience for me. In that position, it was quite a unique position in the government at the time, because the parliamentary assistant to the provincial secretary of social development had line responsibilities and actually ran, under the minister's guidance, what was then called the Ontario Youth Secretariat. And so I had this mini department to try and take care of. And Mrs. Birch had said to the Premier, and I think this applied to my predecessor, Terry Jones, our late friend, as well as myself, You know, if we're going to have this position and the person has line responsibilities, they should get to go to cabinet committee as a junior member, but a member nonetheless. So I was the only PA that got to go to cabinet committee meetings, and I sat there at the table with people like Dennis Timbrell and Betty Stevenson, Bob Welsh, Tom Wells, Larry Grossman, Keith Norton, Reuben Bates, all of these very high-powered cabinet ministers. But let there be no mistake, at those weekly cabinet committee meetings, who was running the show, and it was Mrs. Birch. And there would be huddled gatherings at the end of these meetings where various ministers would be called over and told sometimes what they were doing right, and I'm thinking quite frequently what was not going the way the provincial secretary would like it, and things were corrected in due course. I have one beef, Margaret, that I have to, I've sat on this for many, many years, but I think it's time to finally clear the air. Very often, before a long weekend or a holiday period, Margaret and Guy would be going down to their country home, which was on Peely Island. And I was always told by your executive assistant, Verla Fiveash, you never bother Mrs. Birch when she's going to Peely Island. You can't bother the minister when she's going to Peely Island. You can't reach her anyway. There's no way to communicate when she's down there. And I accepted this at first. But then during those long weekends, I would be getting calls from Verla saying, the minister wondered if you can go to Sudbury next Tuesday because there's this panel discussion and she's really not going to be able to go. Oh, okay. 6 hours later, hi, Phil, it's Verla. The minister wondered if you could bring greetings to a group that's going to be on the front steps at 2 o'clock on Monday because she'll be in committee, is not able to do it. And that's fine. And then I started to think, how is it these communications are coming out of Peely Island, but nothing is getting back in? And I came to believe that there was kind of a Bermuda Triangle out there in Lake Erie that communications could come out of, but they could not penetrate back in. And I continue to this day to believe that was the case. Anyway, I, in all seriousness, have to say that it was a tremendous honor to serve and to work under Margaret Birch. To me, all of the things that we've heard and all of the things that were said in those 3 excellent speeches in the House this morning are true. That she was a tough and focused politician, but at the same time, the most gracious, friendly, helpful person that you could ever wish to work with. To me, she was the quintessential Bill Davis Tory, in that we did our good work and we fought the good fight, but that civility and cooperation were the watchwords of the day. And Margaret, you absolutely epitomized that spirit to so many of us. And I am so delighted that you're here to be recognized. I think it's long overdue, frankly, but recognized nonetheless. And I'm so absolutely delighted to be here and to be a very small part of the celebration of your wonderful career and legacy. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Phil. That was certainly heartfelt and brings back a lot of memories for many of us. The part that interests me is the sort of collegiality that took place during that period of time. And I think, Margaret, you're one of the people that contributed to that, certainly under the leadership of Mr. Davis and a lot of other people who were in that caucus. So my thanks to you personally for that. At this point, I'd like to call upon Maureen Quigley, who was at that point a policy analyst in the Secretariat for Policy Development. Right. That sounds like the kind of thing that Patrick Reed would have done. You met Patrick?
Just a few times. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, Mrs. Birch, your family, and members past and present. One of the delights of being both the spouse of Patrick, a member of the Association of Former Parliamentarians, and a former civil servant, is having the opportunity to attend this Distinguished Service Award luncheon. This year's honoree is of very special significance to me. As Provincial Secretary and Chair of the Cabinet Committee of Social Development, Mrs. Birch was my minister from 1974 to 78, when I was in my first professional position, fresh out of graduate school, as a policy analyst. As I look back now over my career of 42 years as a public servant and independent consultant, I believe that Mrs. Birch and her deputy, Dr. Doug Wright, were the most important and instrumental mentors in giving me the first opportunity to test myself, to grow, and to be part of a high-functioning team. Even though we were referred to as one of the super ministries, we were in fact very small. Unlike ministers' offices today, the minister had no more than 2 or 3 staff, and as I recall, there were only about 5 or 6 of us in the civil service part of the provincial secretariat, including myself. Consequently, Mrs. Birch and Dr. Wright expected us all to assume full responsibility for whatever files and interministerial policy issues we were assigned. I will never forget being informed that I would personally be making the presentation on my first policy issue to the Cabinet Committee on Social Development less than a month after I assumed my position. I can still see Mrs. Birch sitting at the head of the table, surrounded by her ministerial colleagues, including Dennis. I took my seat at the end of the table and prayed that I would not blow this, as Mrs. Birch and Dr. Wright smiled warmly and with confidence and encouragement as I began. They gave each of us wings, and we were all expected to fly in working directly with ministers, senior servants in the line ministries, and senior staff across the government in a way that was unprecedented in the civil service at that time, and I still believe is unprecedented today. The toughest policy issue that we worked on together was group homes. In 1976, I was asked to chair an interministry committee to develop a group homes policy for Ontario. This was a very controversial and complex issue, both within the government because of the number of ministries involved, and with municipalities and stakeholder groups across the province. It was also the time that while the character of the suburbs in Toronto and other large urban communities were changing and becoming more diverse, there was a very strong and growing NIMBY syndrome in many communities. Mrs. Birch had the ministerial lead in the policy development process, tackling this issue head-on with her colleagues and with municipal leaders. After many months and endless dialogue, the policy was approved by Cabinet and became the framework for the subsequent enactment of enabling group homes policies in metropolitan Toronto and several other communities. Finally, I would like to reflect very fondly on Mrs. Birch as having consummate skills in running interference. When Patrick and I started dating in 1975, the fact that he was an opposition Liberal Labour MPP and I was working for a committee of cabinet did not go unnoticed and was readily identified by many as a career-limiting move, at least for me. However, Mrs. Birch, who was well aware and watched our romance mature, never took a partisan stand and never doubted my confidentiality and the ability to professionally manage what was seen by some of her colleagues as a totally unacceptable situation. Patrick and I were so proud that she was in attendance at our wedding in 1979 and have never forgotten her support to the two of us. Mrs. Birch and I had a chance to speak on Friday on the phone after many years. I was so thrilled to hear your voice sounding so young. And as I said when I came in, you look today the same as you did when I left in 1978. Patrick and I are so pleased to be able to share with your colleagues in honoring you today and to recognize the tremendous impact you had on me in the formative years of my career. Congratulations.
Thank you, Maureen. That was delightful. I don't know how Patrick escaped all that good feeling, but he did. We have the pleasure of having the Minister of Women's Services, Tracy McCharles, who is, I think, also Margaret's MPP at this point. Would you like to say a few words for us?
Good afternoon, everyone. It really is an honor to be here with all of you, and especially with Mrs. Birch. We were chatting at lunch about our collective deep roots in Scarborough and talking about her first days volunteering with the auxiliary at the Scarborough General Hospital, where I was born and where the nuns used to run that hospital. So we shared a few stories about that my mother conveyed to me. And then, of course, more recently associated with the Centenary Hospital, where my great-grandmother from West Hill, who lived on West Hill Drive, actually, was on the founding auxiliary group. And there's a book honoring all of our former auxiliary members in the Centenary lobby to this day. So we've enjoyed our lunch talking about that and how women in particular played an active role in those auxiliaries. And I remember when I looked at my relatives who were on those auxiliaries, how I considered them to be active leaders in the community, and that is indeed how she started much of her community work. So power to the auxiliaries, I would say, for that. And of course, growing up in Scarborough, I always knew of Mrs. Birch. I associated her with her work in government and as a leader, a respected leader. And of course now with the Margaret Birch wing at our beloved Centenary Hospital in her honor, you can't help but think of you every time you go to that hospital. And as the Ontario Minister responsible for women's issues, it's really women like you, Margaret, who have paved the way for the rest of us, for women in politics, to have great careers, to have the respect of all of our colleagues, have the support of our colleagues, men included, because that is so important. And I know, be very pleased about how much all the parties are working together to improve women's economic security in Ontario, to close the wage gap, which unfortunately still exists for women in Ontario. There's tremendous all-party support on combating things like sexual harassment and violence, and there's more work to do. And this morning, Minister Sousa, the Minister of Finance, and I met with a group that is very focused on women in leadership positions and on boards of directors, both in the private sector and the public sector. Again, much progress has been made, but so much more work to do. But it's because of women like you that we have made many of the successes we have. And I would also say within government that the work you did in your department really highlighted the importance of the social services sector. Sometimes people think of government as taxation and roads and bridges and all those kinds of things, but the reality is much of the budget is associated with our social services agenda as governments over the years, and that women have held the purse strings, may I say, as well. So that continues to be the case, and congratulations to you for leading that. And as a fellow Scarborough person, and now you live in my riding. It's such an honor to have you in our community. And I know you were a great spokesperson for Scarborough. We were talking about how before amalgamation, Scarborough is one of the largest cities in Canada. It's a great part of Toronto now, a great independent city before, very diverse, very large, a great community to live in, grow, raise families, and work in. So thank you for the work you did locally. Thank you for the work you did provincially, and it's an honor and a privilege to know you. Thank you.
I keep getting notes about people I should remember to thank, and I've got about 500 of them. First of all, let me thank the people who are filming all of this. There's going to be a big project put together celebrating 100 years of women's ability to vote, being broadcast. Recording is looking at doing that all. They recorded this morning, they're recording now, and I'm sure that some of you, at least, will enjoy seeing parts of that as it comes to fruition later on. There are a number of people who have helped us put this together today, and the clerk is here, as a matter of fact. Thank you. Another groundbreaker. It's the first female clerk of the province of Ontario. Is that correct? Congratulations. When I was mayor, though, we had 3 clerks that were all excellent, one after the other. We're all female. They were better than anybody else we could hire. So, thank you. We had great assistance from Anna Resundis in protocol and Nokomis O'Brien preparing graphics and doing all kinds of things to help us put this together. The legislative photographer, Monica Weber, and the food services person, Monica Weber, I'm sorry. The Nokomis is the legislative photographer. I also want to thank the right-hand person for this whole organization. Nobody could move anywhere without the help from Mobina Bahami in our office. And don't worry, Mobina, it'll work. Don't worry. Former cabinet minister, colleague of Margaret Birch's, and who also was in that secretariat that you ran. Dennis used to refer to her as the boss, I think. Dennis Timbrell.
Thank you, Doug. And first, Minister, current and former members, I'm delighted to be here, and I also want to commend Mobina for her fine work. If I was still the member for Don Mills, she would be one of my constituents, living right across the street from the Dennis R. Timbrell Resource Center in Don Mills. Margaret and I came into the House together in 1971. We were 2 of 29 brand new Tory members elected in that campaign. We almost had a 30th in North Bay, but thank God that didn't come to pass. Anyway, read Steve's book. You'll understand why I say that. But I'm particularly pleased, too, that in addition to Margaret and myself from the Davis cabinet era, we're joined today by Gordon Carton. And I've never thanked Gordon for this. You see, I was elected in 1971, 24 years old, green as grass. And my riding was half North York, half East York. There were 2 sitting members of the cabinet from North York, the Honourable Dalton Bales in York Mills riding, Attorney General, and the Honourable Gordon Carton, who I think at the time you were at Transportation, I can't recall exactly. And I get a phone call from Miss A on the 25th of February, 1974. The Premier would like to see you. And I went over, and I had no idea, but at that time I was parliamentary assistant at colleges and universities and thoroughly enjoying working with Jack McNee, who was my minister, and working on cultural programs, that sort of thing. And he said, I'm going to make some changes in the cabinet tomorrow, Dennis, and I'd like you to join the cabinet without portfolio to take over the youth secretariat from Margaret Birch, who's going to become the provincial secretary for social development. And I said, well, that's great. I said, but what about Gordy and Dalton? Well, they're both retiring. And so I have to thank you, Gordon, for, you see, Margaret was the first woman minister in Ontario, and I became the youngest ever minister in Ontario. Something for which Bob Nixon never, ever forgave me, because prior to me, Harry Nixon had been the youngest minister ever at the ripe old age of 28. And I can remember walking out of the caucus soon afterwards, and Nixon was walking down the corridor. He said, the boy minister. And anyway, we went on from there. But I'm delighted that Randy and Jane and your children are here today. I know that in spirit, Guy is here, Mrs. Stewart's here. Team Birch was formidable in Scarborough. Margaret doesn't know this, but our political careers actually both started earlier than that in 1962. You ran for Scarborough, I guess it was still a township council then. And I had just been elected as an MP in the student parliament of Cedar Brae Collegiate. I was the deputy leader of the Green Party. Take notes. I was the deputy leader of the Green Party, and we won. So I became deputy prime minister and attorney general of Cedar Brae Collegiate. We both went on to bigger and better things after that. In May of 1971, I was nominated to succeed Stanley Randall as the Conservative standard bearer in Don Mills. Pat will remember Stan, I'm sure. And soon afterwards, see, I had also, because I grew up in Scarborough from when we moved from Kingston in the mid-50s, I'd been very active in the YPCs. In fact, I was the president of the Scarborough East YPCs from about 62 to 68, thereabouts. And so I got a phone call shortly after my nomination to say, be at Laurier Collegiate on this night in June, and you're going to see something fantastic. And I did. That was the night that Margaret was nominated to represent our party to take on Tim Reed, who was no slouch as a campaigner and as a member. And she succeeded very well. And off we came to Queen's Park. I have to, now, when I went into cabinet, I succeeded Margaret at the Youth Secretariat, which at that point was only a couple of years old, but boy, things were really humming. She had built a tremendous staff and already a body of material advocacy for youth, and I followed on and tried to follow on in her footsteps. But 11 months later, I went off to the Ministry of Energy for a couple of years, and then came back to health in 1977. And I want to talk about that in particular because you've heard a lot today about Margaret's background in healthcare. And I must say, I truly enjoyed the three presentations in the House this morning. It sounded more like the legislature that we sat in, to be honest. And after we left in question period, broke open. I thought, no, it has changed. It has changed. But Margaret was incredibly supportive. I mean, somebody once wrote that to be Minister of Health of Ontario is to have the second toughest political job in Canada after Prime Minister of Canada. And after 5 years, 10 days, and 2 hours in that portfolio, I can attest to that. But when it came to, I had a particularly strong interest, and this goes back to my childhood, in fact, in Kingston, in mental health issues. And I was telling Margaret earlier that during the campaign in '71, and the last few days, I was at the subway stop at Victoria Park Subway, because Crescenttown, like I said, my constituency went all the way down to the Danforth in East York. And this woman came up to me and literally in my face said, "What do you think about the Williston Report?" I said, "I haven't got a clue. What is the Williston Report?" She said, "Oh, you politicians are all the same." I said, hold on. Give me your name, give me your phone number. I showed up here at the caucus office 4 days after that election and said, I want an office, I want to get going. And the first thing I asked for was the Williston Report. That led to me, that was one of the most shocking reports I ever read in government. And it led to me visiting the Huronia Regional Center in Orillia and the Rideau Center in Smiths Falls. So when I got the chance, that program wasn't in the Ministry of Health, it was in Community and Social Services. But it certainly, there were images, some of which I shared with Margaret earlier today, that stuck with me then and will stick with me forever, of the conditions and the people that I saw, and the wonderful work that the staff did with not enough resources, frankly. So one of the things I wanted to do, I had a constituent come to see me in my first 6 months in office, and he'd been stopped on the Don Valley Parkway one Saturday afternoon for speeding. And in those days, remember, our driver's licenses were all paper, our ownership was paper, everything was paper. And when the constable pulled him out of the car and told him why he was being stopped, he ripped all of his documents and threw them to the wind. 6 months later, he was discharged from Whitby Psychiatric Hospital for that offense. And I thought, if I ever get to a position of responsibility, I can do something about that. That's not going to happen on my watch. So we put together, for its time, fairly comprehensive redo of the Mental Health Act. It's since been amended at least 3 or 4 more times since then and improved every time since. But in its time, it was fairly controversial. We had 2 cabinet colleagues who were physicians, and the leader of the opposition was a psychiatrist. And needless to say that both my colleagues in cabinet and the leader of the opposition didn't make life very easy for me. But I had Margaret on my side. And I knew that with her support, we would weather the storm. To the point that I got a call from Miss A again. This time it wasn't a cabinet shuffle. Premier wanted to see me. I walked in, and this is, Steve's got this in his book as well. I walked in, and he said, well, it's about this Mental Health Act. I said, yeah, I figured that's why you want to see me. And it was very simple. He said, is this your legislation or is this your staff? I said, Premier, I wrote some of these sections myself. Fine, end of it. But I knew not only did I have the boss's support, but I had this boss's support as well. And that was a very, very powerful combination to have behind you. I decided I was going to close the Lakeshore Psychiatric Hospital. That had never been done before. Never been done before. And I decided that every penny of the budget for Lakeshore Psychiatric Hospital was going to be transferred into community mental health programs. We weathered that storm as well with Margaret's support. You look back over your career and people sometimes will ask me, well, what did you do? What are you proud of? One of the things I'm most proud of, and this is actually Margaret's legacy as well as mine, is the assistive devices program. We worked on that together at a time of fiscal restraint. We had a steep uphill fight with finance and some of the other policy wonks. I used to call them other names, actually, at management board. Most people say analysts. I pronounced it differently. But we got it through. And we did. On the day that we announced it, we were very clear. This is for children today, but eventually it's going to cover the entire population, and so it does today. And it's a great credit to Margaret Birch and her support. When I went to agriculture, one of the things I wanted to do there, and this kind of harkens back to some of the work in the Youth Secretariat as well as at Health, I initiated a study of women in rural Ontario. It was the first, and I think still the only, careful, in-depth look at the needs of women in rural Ontario, the changing dynamics in their lives. I mean, the rural Ontario I grew up in Frontenac County, and the rural Ontario today are light years and planets apart. And the final thing I want to talk about is when Mr. Davis called a certain cabinet meeting, which most of us thought was to call an election, and instead told us he was retiring. One of the first people I turned to was Margaret. And she honored me, and I to this day, Margaret, I can't tell you how much I appreciate the fact that you agreed, along with Leo Bernier, to chair my campaign to succeed Mr. Davis as Premier. And for those of you who haven't read Steve's wonderful book, page 392 will tell you, well, I was just going to say nice things about you. Why are you leaving? Oh, okay. Percy and I go back a long way. You'll find out exactly what did happen, what really happened on the second ballot. But you could do Janet and me no greater honor than what you did to stand up and support us through that time. So, Margaret, of all the people, and there are many here, and many unfortunately, I have my copy of the 29th legislature photo on my den wall. Unfortunately, every once in a while I have to go put a metal X through a face, and there aren't that a lot of us left. But of all the members I served with in the House, in the Cabinet, in the party, and in the service of the people of Ontario, you are the best. Thank you.
Thank you, Dennis. That was eloquent. They referred to Dennis as a young fogey when he first got elected. Remember that? I think it was. I think it was Tom Wells who said it, but I can't be sure. Anyway, the reason we're all here is to honor the next speaker, who is our friend and mentor, Margaret Birch.
Means a great deal to me to see so many familiar faces, and lots of new ones as well. But what made me so happy when I sat in the House today was looking out and seeing so many women members. No offense to you gentlemen, but you know, I sternly believe that women have something special to offer because of their family life, their children, their husbands, and they have a deeper understanding of some of the needs of those people. And I think it's a proven fact that it's possible for women to become very politically minded, and it's such a pleasure to look around and see so many young people becoming involved. I just wish there were more of you. I wish there was more emphasis in schools about political life and how important it is to all of us. I've had a wonderful life. I've enjoyed every minute of it. Sometimes I got into trouble over some of the things I did or said, but I was always able to wiggle out of that. But I have a beautiful family, and that was one of the reasons that I felt so strongly about many of the issues that we tackled in those days. When we moved to Scarborough, it was a growing community with sad lack of beds, many other social services. So I walked over to the Scarborough General Hospital that was run by the Sisters of Misericord and offered my services. Within a month, I was secretary, and from then on, it never stopped. But I saw the need for more hospital beds in Scarborough. The corridors at the Scarborough General Hospital in those days were filled with beds because there just wasn't enough room, and the sisters couldn't get the funding that was needed to build a new addition. So I went to work to raise money by holding all kinds of affairs, art shows and special dinner arrangements, and we were able to raise some money, but not enough to build an addition. And some of the doctors in the hospital approached me and suggested that perhaps if I ran in the next municipal election, I could use that as the basis for my being there, more hospital beds for Scarborough. The doctors promised to help me, which they did, and it was my first attempt at being a politician. I was very new at it. But anyway, I worked hard and I spread the message about Scarborough needing more hospital beds, and also that Scarborough needed a university. And I didn't win the election, I came in second. Carl Millett beat me out. But I was really quite pleased with that because I really didn't want to be a municipal politician. And shortly after that, I got word that I was going to be appointed to build a new hospital in Scarborough. And not only that, but the University of Toronto was going to extend the school out into the Scarborough area. So it was all worthwhile, but it was an introduction into the political side of life. But I got busy doing other things, helping to get the Centenary Hospital built. And there were just so many things that needed to be done in Scarborough at that time. There was such a lack of some of the social programs that we didn't have. So I became more and more involved, and the more involved I became, the more I recognized that more was needed. And I just seemed to go from one thing to another. And thank God I had a family that supported me. My husband, Guy, who worked for the Toronto Star, was always there to support me, to encourage me. And the times that I was away from the house, he always took over. And both Randy and Jane were always very good. So it began a life of change. And then one day I got a phone call from Tom Wells. And he said, "Margaret, how would you like to run in the next election?" And I thought he was teasing me. And I said, "I never even thought about it." He said, "Well, we would like very much to have you as a candidate." So after I got off the phone, I turned to Guy and said, is that a joke? And he said, "I don't think so." And he said, "Consider it. You'd be a good politician." So anyway, I did consider it. I did run in the election. I was very new at it, but I had a lot of help and did a lot of hard work. And finally, I became a member of the government. Once there, things seemed to develop very quickly, and I became very involved. And as you've already heard, I had no need to repeat all the different positions that I held. But the most effective one was as the Minister of Social Services, because finally I had the ability to look at social services throughout Ontario and do some traveling around and look at some of the facilities that required great changes, particularly the one of mental hospitals, psychiatric facilities, sadly lacking. I've come out of some of those, as they were called then, asylums, and cried all the way home at what I'd seen. I saw a young boy in a cage begging to be let out. And I determined that we were going to make changes, because so many of the patients in those hospitals told me there was no way they could have their relatives come to even see them because they were too far away from home. And so I was determined when we started building the Centenary Hospital that one floor was going to be a psychiatric facility. Well, you have no idea what I met with that suggestion. Nobody was interested. That's unheard of. We don't want a psychiatric facility in this general hospital. Well, not one to be taken lightly when somebody says no. I phoned Dr. Henderson, the Deputy Minister of Health, and I told him what I wanted to do. And he invited me to come down and meet with him. So we discussed some of the possibilities, and he said, "I agree with you, it's a good idea." And he said, "What we'll do is give them more money for more psychiatric beds." And so, of course, money was the answer, and we got the psychiatric floor installed. Then I got a call from Sister Marie DDS of the Scarborough General Hospital, and she said, "Margaret, how did you do that?" And I told her, she said, "I'm going to do the same thing." She did, and they had the psychiatric floor on the 10th floor as well. So it only goes to prove, if you see a need and you do something about it, don't take no for an answer. If you know the need is there, go after it. Get it done. There are still many, many things that need to be changed. As I look around, I'm not involved politically, but I am interested politically, and I pay a great deal of attention to everything that's going on, including the American presidential. Anyway, I don't want to bore you with all of the years that I spent traveling around the province, being disturbed by some of the things I saw under the social policy that we had adopted, and determined that something was going to be done. And fortunately, training schools, it was terrible when I went into training school and saw what was happening to young people instead of giving an opportunity to righten the problems in their life. And so we established group homes. And of course, that didn't go over too well with a lot of areas, but it worked. Young people, instead of being sent to an institution and locked up, were able to live a fairly normal life with supervision. And to this day, I still hear from parents who were involved with their children ending up in a group home. I'm very, very grateful that it was there to help them. There are still many, many things to be done, but I'm 95, and I'm getting a little, what should I say? My energy is not what it used to be. My determination's still there. And I would be willing to help anyone who has good ideas about how we can improve the lives of so many people in Ontario. And with all these new people coming into our country, some coming with dreadful, dreadful things that have happened to them, there's going to be a real need to be able to help them. And I hope that I can entrust you all to be there to provide that help. As I say, I'm 95. I still have a spirit that wants to do things, tries to do things, but I think I'll have to just keep that in my home, in my family, and just encourage all of you to become involved as much as you can. More women, please. More young women, please. The needs are there, and you can fulfill them. It's been wonderful to be here today and to see some of my old friends, and to hear some of the things that you had to say. Thank you very much for those kind words. Thank you. Thank you.
We have some things for you.